probably know we're from England, born in Manchester, and through various strange quirks of intelligence, we ended up with a scholarship to an all-boys school. And that all-boys school, at the very first meeting that we attended, the first talk by the headmaster, he said, "You are all the future leaders of Britain. You will become bankers, politicians, diplomats, very rich CEOs, and you will have privileges beyond your dreams, except for you, Genesis. We're going to get you." So we watched that, we watched the way it worked, and it reminded me that we'd always been ashamed of masculinity. You know, when you're in that environment, for example, the previous headmaster had just committed suicide. Why did he commit suicide? And where? He committed suicide in his office because he'd been caught soliciting teenage boys in the public toilets. And because the school was sponsored by the Queen of England, he was ashamed of himself and ashamed of the scandal that would break if he had to go to court. So rather than admit he was gay and a paedophile, to protect the reputation of the Queen, he hung himself in his office next to the bed where he raped people. That's where we learn about masculinity. Stories like that. You've gone quiet. Quite right too. And all the time at that school it was all about being strong, being a man. My friend Spidey wrote a poem, and it was for homework for English. But some of the rich boys found out and beat him up so badly they ruptured his appendix and he nearly died and had to have it removed. So there was this split with the culture. There were three of us who liked the beatniks, new music, Sun Ra, Jimi Hendrix, the Mothers of Invention, the Velvet Underground, all this stuff that was coming out was enthralling and amazing to us. And we were reading about the beatniks and seeing that it didn't have to be this way, that people's lives could be their work, that in fact, in a way, life is the work. That was the split that we found through being at those places. We personally got beaten up a lot too, often beaten unconscious. But when we left, we thought, now we know the enemy. We know what they're like. And God damn it, they're still walking on this planet. 45 years later, they're back with a vengeance. Why are they back? We used to hitchhike down to London and go to a place called the Arts Laboratory. And that was where all the freaks used to go. And we had our first ever whole wheat sandwich there. That was very exciting. There was this girl who had a little table and homemade whole wheat bread and cheese. A revelation. And they also had a cinema where you could sleep all night. The floor was just big foam cushions with a carpet over them. So you could just lie back, get stoned, and watch films. Experimental films, of course. We saw Lindsay Kemp perform there with his more or less all-gay dance troupe, doing new kinds of dance, a sort of drag dance. You got something you want to say? Some kind of drag dance. They would dress up and often do entire performances naked. So there was this change happening. Opportunities, different things, different ideas. And we got to know those people and the Gay Lip Street Theatre. And so we started to do performances with them. At the weekends, we'd go out to Notting Hill Gate and we would do drag as a political act, which meant that we would dress as females, some with success, some without, and we would parade through Notting Hill Gate kissing strangers. It was interesting to see the way it all worked. You have to remember that it was only a few years before that homosexuality had been decriminalised. And what we've been looking at lately is it's all coming back. Yesterday we were walking through the East Village. We went into this bookshop and stood and saw this book, We Are Everywhere, by Jerry Rubin, one of the yippies. And we started to flip through it, and there's pictures of young black men being beaten up and dragged away by the police. And there are students protesting war, protesting economic inequality, and being beaten up by the police and dragged off to prison. And there are people trying to legalize marijuana and being beaten up and dragged off to prison. And we just thought, it's just the same as now. What the fuck has happened? We've dedicated 40 plus years of our life to trying to persuade people that generally change is good and that change is inevitable. It's what creates evolution. And where does change usually begin? In a spiritual revelation and through creation, all forms of art. That's where the changes usually begin. People who are ready to admit that their perception is adjusting. From doing the things with the street theatre, the Gaelic street theatre, we ended up in a commune, originally called the Exploding Galaxy, then it became Transmedia Exploration, and it was a rigorous way of deprogramming the self. We've talked about it before, so some of you may know this story, but when you arrived, all your clothes was put into this big one box in the middle of a large room. And then when you woke up, you went to the box and decided what to wear from that box. If you woke up late, you wore what was left. So you might end up wearing the wrong gender appropriate clothing, and you would have to think how to relate to that, how to change or not change your behaviors. You could also only sleep in one place one night. You had to move every night and sleep somewhere different. You had no money. If you wanted money for something, you had to persuade everybody else in the commune that it was worth you having it. So they would say things like, well, why do you need money to get on the subway? Can't you just walk? Could you steal a bike? Could you get into a taxi and not pay and run away? Do you really have to go anyway? What do you need to say that's so important that you need money? And all these different exercises start to make you strip away habits, inherited conditioning, things that you've taken without thought on board, as that's just how you live, that's how you behave. But in fact, you choose your own behavior. You should never accept somebody else's norms. So when you get to a certain point in your life, you start to build a self. And one of the great things, powerful things to do is change your name. And if you look at different communes all over the world and cults, one of the very first things they often do is change their names. And it's saying, now we have a completely clear board and we can decide whoever we want to be, what we want to be, how we want to speak, how we want to dress, how are we going to present ourselves, what do we really want to do. We have a certain amount of time and then we're gone. What do we do with time? And how much do we have? We got lucky because we died in 1967. by a strange set of circumstances, pills that we were given for asthma destroyed my adrenal glands. But nobody knew it was a side effect of the drug. And so one day we started to feel very sick, and the next day much more sick. The third day, we collapsed in a coma. The doctor that we had just moved to the house opposite my house. My sister ran across, and he was late for work, otherwise he would not have been in. He just read a magazine article that weekend that said this was a possible side effect of the drug. So he did the Pulp Fiction thing, you know, with the big syringe. Whack! Right there. And even so, when we got to the hospital, we were declared dead on arrival. But somehow, they brought me back. We do remember floating above, like you read about, floating above this gurney with doctors and nurses, and they were actually discussing who's going to tell the parents that he's dead. And we were up there looking down thinking, we're not dead, we're here, oi. And then we just remember waking up the next day. Somehow we came back in. And then that day the doctor came round on his rounds, and he said to him, what's going to happen? And he said to me, we'll never forget that. Well, you could have a normal life, or you could drop dead any day, we just don't know. And what it gave me then as a gift was a really clear sense that each day we get is truly good luck and a blessing, because none of us really know how many days we have. And that was the day we decided, fuck university, fuck fitting in, fuck getting a job. We don't know how long we've got, so we're going to do what we really want with this life. Then you think, well, what's the worst that could happen? We could starve to death. Very hard in England to starve to death. Even if you want to, it's hard. So that was it. We'd made a decision. We were going to design our own life and make the best use of every day to do something creative, something that was giving back to this planet, to this species, to this phenomena of apparently being alive. After we left that commune, it was kind of like Animal Farm. One day we noticed that the commune stroke cult leader's girlfriend had these beautiful dark green leather booties. And we said, where'd you get those? Oh, Fitz bought them for me for my birthday. We said, but you didn't ask if you could use the money first. No. Well, then we need a discussion. No, we don't need a discussion. It's up to Fitz. And there it was. What actually happened when we tried to call a meeting was everybody stopped speaking to me because we'd spoiled it. The rules had changed. The game had been exposed. How easy it is to be tempted to surrender your principles. How easy it is to forget what you're really trying to do. And that's going to be something, hopefully, that you're all going to do. Try to remember why you're there. Try to remember what your true dream really is. What if everything happened how you would like it to? What would you do? What do you really want to tell the world? Have you got something to say? If you have, be clear. Make sure you know what you want to say, and then say it, regardless of the consequences. Don't be afraid. So one of the things that we've been known for lately is pandrogeny, positive androgyny. And we were thinking about how to bring all of this around from the 60s to now and what might be a future. And we looked back and we remembered, as we've said, that we were embarrassed about being male, but it wasn't the body itself, it was the way that it seemed to state that this was a privileged position. Being male was participating in ruling the world and society and was a profoundly special state. But when we looked at what men were doing in their behaviours, it was shameful. And there was no equality, and there was bigotry and hypocrisy, and bullying, and lying, and exploitation on a very grand scale. There's hang on. Next one. Hang on while I get some water. You must have seen it, and one of the things that artists and creative people should do all the time is observe what's happening around you. Don't accept anything on face value. Don't take anything for granted. Look at how people behave, not what they say. Look at how they relate to each other. We found ourselves more and more uncomfortable with being judged as male. We didn't necessarily want to be female, but to be female certainly looked preferable than being male. Because to be male was in some way to accept a connection to all the horrors that have come with that. Now, why are women not equal? The original story goes back a long way, and because we have so much time and no more, we'll recommend a book that you should try and read. It's by somebody called Leonard Shlain, S-C-H-L-A-I-N, and it's called Sex, Power and Time. Now, if you go right back to early days when we lived in caves, the male of the species had a role, which was hunting, protecting the clan, basically doing things that involved strength and sometimes violence, but it was a good behavior at the time. It added to everybody's well-being and protection and safety and fed them. And so in the environment they lived in then, the male gene, the angry male gene, the violent male gene, the rapist male gene had a purpose within that environment and structure. Now, men were afraid of women for thousands and thousands of years because women made babies. And it was only around 40,000 years ago that men put together that fucking actually was part of making a baby. Because they had no sense of time. Women had a sense of time because of menstruation. And so they seemed to have this magical prophetic ability. They could say, in this many moons, the animals will come back. In this many moons, the snow will go. And in this many moons, we can move to a warmer place. And the men were fascinated but afraid. How do women know all this? How do they find this out? And they also, because they were just fucked randomly, had no idea that that had anything to do with babies coming out of women. They thought women created children themselves. Somebody got wise. Perhaps they had bright red hair, and they noticed that a baby came out with bright red hair. And for some reason they guessed the woman hadn't had sex with anyone else. And they went, oh my God, I helped make that piece of life. That's me. That's me come back. I want to control that process. I want to make sure that my babies the street right now, anywhere in this world, there will be women and men walking past you. And sad to say, some of those men would rape you in a moment if they thought they would not get punished. Every time there's a war, some of the soldiers use that as an excuse to rape and pillage. Every time there's any kind of disaster that means they can't be caught, they'll revert to that ancient, primal way of behaving. There's a lot of work to do. There's also people walking around out there on the streets right now, they're getting more visible lately, who would happily smile and read the Bible while you were burned at the stake, because they know they're right, because they have the answers and the power. So where we're going is Pandrogeny and gender are absolutely linked in to all the power structures around you, from family to country to globe. And how do you break those patterns? We did a lot of research in the 70s and 80s with ritual and sensory deprivation and heroic amounts of psychedelic drugs, as Terence McKenna liked to say. We once asked him what DMT was like, and he said, "It turns the universe inside out, Genesis." What does that mean? We didn't join him with the DMT. So here you are, suddenly in this world, and you have no real power beyond your imagination. How do you change the world? How do you make things happen? How do you change the self? And the basic thing is, with actions, you have to change the self first. By example, you can lead them. So how do you do that? How do you take it all away? How do you make sure that you're not just fumbling the idea? There are copies, luckily, of the Psychic Bible in the bookshop over there, and a lot of the information in that book is about this very idea, making sigils, learning how to deprogram yourself, how to learn what yourself really wants. And the basic system is based on a simple technique, which is the orgasm. And we just love it when homework is orgasms. It's a win-win, isn't it? It feels really good, and it might do something good. So the theory is, and you probably, I know there's a lot of wise people here today. Is it night yet? Well, it looks like night. There's a lot of wise people here, and so they maybe know some of this, but basically, at the moment of orgasm, all the different layers of your mind are joined together. And so you can send a message right past all the usual filters, the hesitations, the socializations, the obligations to other people, to family, to religion, to whatever. You can bypass it all and speak to the deepest part of yourself. Self with big letters. S-E-L-F. You. Each of you is a universe. That sounds very hippie, but it's a fact. Only you will be present for every second of your life. No one else will. And that means that you have a universe with you at the center. It's an amazing thing to have, isn't it? So you can then choose what goes into that space. And if you want to change your behavior, you can write it down or play it with a tape or chant it, whatever it might be, but you design a way to speak to your inner self and say, this is really what we truly want. And at the beginning people say silly stuff like, I want a girlfriend who'll let me fuck her up the ass. I want a boyfriend who never asks me to get fucked up the ass. Happens a lot, doesn't it? But then it doesn't have a satisfactory feeling afterwards. You might get what you wanted, but then you think, well, is that it? Is that all we really want from life? To have control over my ass? There must be more to me than that. And so you start to analyze yourself a bit more and think, that's not really what we wanted to say. What we meant was, we want to have absolute power over all of our sexual choices. And they're only my business in my universe. And I have a right to make those decisions and empower myself and protect those decisions. And then you might go deeper and think, but sexuality is only one part of intimacy. What we really want is to find that person that complements me 100%, my other half, the part of me that's missing in some way. We did some research a long time ago with Lady J. Try not to drop it this time. Of all things, into the story of the Garden of Eden. We were thinking about this feeling we had. We'd fallen in love on this truly unconditional, powerful level, where we simply wanted to become malleable, almost a semi-liquid, and just flow into each other and literally become one blob of love, with no separation anywhere, just completely and utterly joined, outside time and space, forever and ever, just lost in ourselves. So we looked at things, we thought, why do we feel like that? How did all this begin? Where are we from? And we looked at the book of Genesis. And of course, the first thing we saw was the book of creation. And we had one of those lightning bolt moments. Boing! God's first act is creation. Creation is making art, making music, sharing ideas, stimulating people, changing their perceptions. What we're actually doing is divine work. To be an artist, to be a musician, to write, to perform, to discuss all the things we do within a creative place, those are all divine callings. It's like being a doctor or a nurse or a charity worker or anything that's about helping other people or giving selflessly. And that was a really interesting, warm thought. This is important work. It's not just about branding, getting a name that people remember, being successful, getting a formula so that people recognize immediately, oh, that's Dots, that must be Damien Hirst again. And that's, of course, how the main art world works. You find a formula, people like it, rich people buy it on recommendation from galleries, and they stick them in their penthouses, and their friends see them, and they either go, ooh, who's that by? Oh, it's a Damien Hirst. Oh, I've heard of him. Do you think they're going up in value? Oh yes, definitely going up in value. You should get one. I will, for my penthouse. And they do. And the value goes up. And Damien does some more dots, because God forbid he spoils the apple cart and does something different. No, you've got to be able to know who the artist was. That's why we never do very well, because we keep changing everything. But you know what, it's so much more fun. So we're looking at all of this in the book of Genesis, and we came across these articles in an obscure old magazine that said, and it had some illustrations, the original paintings and drawings of the Garden of Eden all represented God, Adam and Eve with male and female genitals, and they all had breasts. They were all hermaphrodites, or as we would like to say, pandrogynes, positive androgynes. We thought, how come we never knew that before? What's even weirder is God's behind a bush, peeping round guiltily, staring at Adam and Eve, without an erection. The Vatican, of course, tried to destroy all those paintings, and it's either 4 or 6 that remain. They're very obscure. But we looked at that again, we thought, wow, so does that mean that the original state of perfection is male and female? Well, that would make sense, because if God is male and female and makes us in his likeness, then we also are male and female, which means there's no either or. In fact, the either or is the fall from grace. When it became male and female, as we say, that's when the whispering began, the conflict, difference. That person looks different to me. Who's going to have the power? What does it mean about our interactions? Either or, good or bad, male or female, Muslim, Christian, black, white, water, wine. And we felt we were onto something, very definitely. Does it mean then that evolution is actually a very slow remembrance of a state of grace, of bliss, a state of perfection, a divine state that we've forgotten or lost, or somehow had broken, and it's now the job of all of us to remember and reclaim our full self, to find the completing part of what we are. And perhaps then our species is actually one species as one being. Perhaps that's God, as people like to use. We prefer the word it, because no one knows what it is. So we look at it, and all of us are little fragments of it. And that also suggests the universe could be made up of everybody's universes combined together. And what would that do? Maybe that's the beginning of a Big Bang, and it's one huge loop, just goes round and round. Interestingly, in the last year, those wonderful people at quantum physics, who we adore, have decided that the universe is a loop, and it does just go round and round, and there actually is no beginning or no end, which sounds awfully biblical. So are these just codes, all these stories? Are they just leftover memories? Are they useful to us? Yes, we think so. Because what causes all these problems right now is the either or. there's something or someone who's different in some way. Look at them. Be afraid of them. All the things that are going wrong in your life, in our country, in our world, are because they're different. And it sounds so stupid when you say that, doesn't it? But it's been happening for thousands of years. And it's happening right now. Oh, that male to female trans wants to use the ladies' toilets. They're different. That's disgusting. Let's attack them. And vice versa. And all of us can tell and remember that know anything of history, that that's the repeating formula. Something is declared other, not truly human, not truly like us, and it's used as a scapegoat for distraction. Distraction for those in power. Distraction in demanding change. It seems to us that we've reached a point where our human species truly is at a crossroads. This is where we could truly blow it and return to a new dark ages, if we even survive at all. Or it could be that this is the moment that will be remembered for the beginning of the change. So how do you get involved in creating change? For us, we looked at that and we thought, if a divine state is a male and female combined, how could we do that? Are there ways to demonstrate that idea in the physical world? And we decided to examine that idea. Could we become Pandrogenians? Could we become more and more alike, actually symbolically becoming each other? And not because of gender, but because of a unity of intention. A way of balancing out all the rough edges of society and social cultures. And we thought, well, there are certain undercurrents that we've noticed in the United States, where we were living and still do, in New York. We'd noticed that when we first came to New York in the 80s, the back of the Village Voice had sex ads. And most of them were biological women offering services to heterosexual men. But by 1997-ish, the back of the Village Voice had mainly she-males offering sexual favors to heterosexual men. That's a seismic shift. And what does it say about heterosexual men? That secretly, they want a chick with a dick. We're almost back at the what do you do with your ass, right? So there they are. It's all laid out. Something is shifting, and it's in the underworld. Always it begins in the underworld. You know, the sexual underworld, the art underworld, the philosophical underworld. That's where you see the first signs. And then we noticed that the great secret of Hollywood and the celebrities of this culture were no longer ashamed of having cosmetic surgery. Far from it. They were boasting about cosmetic surgery and parading it around like a badge. That was another seismic shift. The body is malleable. We can change it if we want. We can redesign it if we want. We don't have to follow the program of our DNA anymore. To us that was very exciting, and it made us look at DNA. So what is DNA? Which is the real life form, the superior life form on this planet? DNA collects information, records information, and then when a human host dies, usually, but not always, many of those human hosts have passed on the updated DNA to another human host in another body. So the DNA has a very clear continuity of increasing information and sophistication, but we just keep dying off at roughly the same time. We extend it more, but we're still dying off. So are we really the primary species, or are we just a meat machine, as Tesla would say, or a cheap suitcase, as Jay would say, that carries around consciousness and also allows DNA to exist as a species? That opens up lots of questions. Does that mean that we're in a kind of a war with DNA? Or are we finally befriending DNA and absorbing it into our world picture? But if DNA is fixed in some way, which it is, its options for how your body changes and develops and the way that you look are already pre-programmed in that DNA. How could you break that program? How could you short-circuit the control of DNA? Well, cosmetic surgery, you can literally just say, my body is not going to look the way it was expected to. We're taking over. We're going to change it. We're going to get rid of the breasts. We're going to get new breasts. We're going to get lumps put under the skin and get pieces of metal put through here, there, and everywhere. And that's just the beginning. Those are just the first little baby steps of understanding the body is not sacred. The body is truly just a way of moving consciousness around. But even that's changing with the internet. Suddenly, we can move around this world without getting out of a seat. So there's a lot of really critical opportunities and changes happening right now. And for people who have a vested interest in the status quo, the last thing they want is change. Far from it. They want to maintain their privilege. They want to maintain their power. They want to maintain their exclusive little clan at any cost. Those people would rather see this world annihilated in nuclear war than lose their stupid bank accounts. And what is a bank account but just numbers moving, getting bigger and smaller? What a pathetic thing to worship. Money. But they do. Oh, they do. So we decided one thing we could do that was very visual and clear and showed a deep commitment was we'd both get matching breast implants. So on Valentine's Day 2003, myself and Lady J went to a friendly cosmetic surgeon and got matching breast implants. And when we woke up, my first words were, these are our angelic bodies. And afterwards, when we'd said it, we thought, where did that come from? But then we thought, angels are always portrayed without genitals, but with breasts sometimes, but no belly buttons because they're not born. So once more, there's a connection with the human species idea of the divine and the body and its malleability and what it symbolizes. We've had more surgeries since then, both of us looking more and more alike. But we weren't trying to look like twins either. We just wanted to make a statement that this is a non-verbal hieroglyph of what we think the human condition is right now and the direction it might well go and probably should go, which is unifying everything, blending things together, just like that big, big love at the beginning. And we think about this and we think of pictures. And one of the pictures we think about is, if you imagine that each of us, whilst our own universe, is also just one cell in a single organism, which we can call the humane species. Think of it almost like a great big amoeba, where this blob of animated flesh and consciousness and perceptions and senses, but we're all part of this one humane being. What does an organism do if it's damaged or wounded? It takes all the resources it has to heal the wound from anywhere amongst its resources, chemicals, food sources, electricity, whatever. But it heals itself by utilizing everything. And if something goes wrong inside it, it does the same. And if part of it is not getting enough nutrient, it will move nutrient to where the nutrient is needed. The organism will always try to maximize the health and efficiency of itself. So imagine the humane species like that, and something is damaged and wounded by, say, an Ebola virus outbreak in Africa, and the entire organism across the planet mobilizes whatever resources it has automatically to sort that out as fast as possible with the least damage, because each person is a cell, and each one that gets hurt or dies is a loss for everyone. And likewise, if there's a famine somewhere, we would naturally just supply the nutrient for the people starving. There wouldn't be a question, an argument, a debate. It would just be done. Which would mean there'd be no need of war, because it would make no sense. You'd be damaging the organism again. And there are enough resources still on this planet to look after everybody without doing any more damage. There really are. Or we can carry on in the self-negating, self-destructive way, and when something is starving somewhere else, we ignore it because it doesn't affect us right now. And so we don't share our resources, we don't share our nutrients, and we don't keep the organism healthy. In a way, we're more like a virus, because we're also damaging the host, which is this planet. Humanity is the virus. Humanity humanity is the virus. So we started our vested interest. That's what's going on. And he also said, how do you short-circuit control? But this goes deeper, because if we're talking about evolution, which is really what we're talking about, it's not just male-female that we're thinking about. We're stating categorically that the human body is malleable. It is not a fixed state anymore. It can be stretched and squeezed and changed, bits taken away, bits added. It is no longer seen as inviolate and fundamentally unchangeable. And we used to talk to Jay about what's next. And of course, next is colonizing space. If we can manage to get back onto the road of evolution. And if you're going into space, why not learn how to hibernate? I mean, it can't be that hard. Frogs do it. Tadpoles do it. Bears do it. Even little things do it. Let's do it. Let's hibernate. Makes sense to me. And then if you're in weightlessness for hours and months and years, do you need legs anymore? Maybe little ones. Depending where you're going to go. Do you need long arms because there's so many knobs? Who knows? Maybe. What about fur? Wouldn't it be nice to grow fur and feathers? We'd like gills so we could live underwater whenever we wanted to. And so suddenly, it's not about gender anymore. It's about how much imagination have you got and how far do you want to go? And is there a limit? We say no. No limits. There can't be limits on the imagination. And we believe all creative forms at this time should be telling us something. Telling us a story or telling us an idea or stating their position on evolution and the species and how we survive. Decoration for its own sake is not enough. Brian Geisen calls that deceptual art. There's a lot about. There's a lot of 50s abstract painting about too, which I don't understand at all. So if the body's malleable and changeable, why are they so angry? These people that are so noisy right now. And we realized it's that thing we talked about at the beginning, maleness. They've grown up, they're mostly in their 70s, thank goodness they're all going to die in 10 years. Maybe 20 for some, but they're on their way out. They know it. And the one thing they've held on to all through their lives is, I am male and I am superior. And that's why my wife stays at home and does the cooking. Just like they should. Just like in those olden days in the caves. Women do the stuff at home. We do the rough stuff. So they're terrified of the fact that being male is no longer a permanent state. It can't be defined anymore. Everything is malleable. That petrifies them. They're strutting around being these big, powerful men, changing rules and regulations and changing the laws and picking on people, showing them how stupid they are. They're real men, leaders of society, diplomats, economists, warmongers, real men. There they are now. We're down here. dwindling away in front of their eyes. And good riddance to it too. We don't want to be male or female, but if we had to choose, we would not be male. Yeah, that's it basically.